welcome to our second EDIFY EDU webinar. EDIFY EDU is a European project co-funded by the EU. There are 12 partners involved that span over 5 countries: Ireland, Greece, Italy, Finland, and Germany. So today's webinar is titled Implementing Comprehensive Diversity and Inclusion Strategies in the Workplace. So I just want to let you know that this session is being recorded. My name's Tamara, and I represent the Irish partners of the project. So today's webinar will be attended by students and business professionals across the globe that are completing our massive open online course, and we hope that you're finding it interesting so far. So today you'll have the opportunity to hear about practices of EDI principles in the workplace from our 2 esteemed speakers. Emma Balfe from Ireland is the Dignity and Respect Officer at the Institute of Art, Design and Technology in Dún Laoghaire, working across the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Unit and the Human Resources Department. Their role focuses on facilitating institutional culture change through training and policy development. Their research and writing practice is concerned with social mobility within the creative and cultural industries, with particular reference to social class, race, and gender. Emma holds an MA degree in gender studies and a BA in visual culture, and postgraduate certificates in consent, sexual violence and harassment, practitioner skills and practice, assessment and evaluation, and learning and teaching. Our second speaker is Angus Hegarty from Ireland. Angus is a renowned leader with over 35 years global experience, notably as Dell Technologies President for International Markets, an organization spanning over 170 countries. An advocate for business innovation, entrepreneurship, sustainability, and gender balance, he co-chairs the Irish government's Balance for Better Business initiative. Angus is a founder of Lakeside Capital Ltd and serves on the Global Advisory Council for Venture Wave Capital and the external oversight body for the Irish Defence Forces. He chairs both Lero Governance Committee and Munster Rugby Commercial Advisory Group. Honoured with the Life Fellowship by the Irish Management Institute in 2019, Angus continues to shape business and leadership. So the webinar today will be broken into sections. The first section, Emma will present on fostering LGBTQ+ inclusive workplaces, followed by a short Q&A. And secondly, Angus will present on diversity and inclusion, a business imperative, followed by another short Q&A. So during the talks, your microphones will be switched off. Please turn on your cameras if you are in the position to do so. And there'll be time for discussion and questions after each presenter. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please put them in the chat box and we'll address them after the talks. So thanks for your attention. I'm now going to hand it over to Emma. Sorry, Emma, excuse me, you're just on mute.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Hi everyone, it's really great to be here and to have been given this opportunity to talk to you. Thank you to Tamara for that wonderful introduction. I'll just echo it. My name is Emma. My pronouns are they, them, and I am the Dignity and Respect Officer in IADT in Dublin in Ireland. So today I'm going to talk to you about how we can foster LGBTQ+ inclusive workplaces, and I'll give the kind of the preamble that I myself am an LGBTQ+ person, and my experience, I guess, kind of navigating the world of education and the world of work has really shaped, I guess, how I approach my work and how I look at policy development as like a real driving force for achieving culture change within an institution, any type of workplace or organization. So, to begin, I won't assume that everyone is, I guess, familiar with what LGBTQ plus means. So the definition really of that is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. Okay, and if you're not familiar with this, queer, even though in the past historically it has been I guess a term that has been used to harm people. Many people in the LGBTQ plus community have now taken the word back, and we use it as an empowering term that is inclusive of really all sexualities and gender identities. So in LGBTQ plus communities, there are people that are intersex, agender, non-binary. It really goes on, and with kind of everything these days is continuously growing, which I think from a business point of view, we can look at as a really exciting time for us, as the more kind of diverse experiences we have, the greater value we can really kind of derive from that. So if we just look at the LGBTQ plus population as a whole, it's very hard to kind of track data on how many people really identify within this community. So in Ireland, where I'm based, we don't actually have an official count of how many LGBTQ plus people there are. However, if we look at different surveys that have been carried out over the past decade, in which members of the population have had to self-identify, so they've been given the opportunity to mark their own gender or sexuality in the way that they see fit. When we take them and we compare them against kind of OECD figures from across Europe, we estimate that there's between 6 and 10% of the population that are LGBTQ plus. So if we look at that in Ireland, if we look at people over the age of 15, so anyone who is kind of on their way into the workforce or maybe already engaged in it, that is somewhere between 71,000 and 405,000 people. So like we are a huge we're a huge kind of facet of the population. However, we still see, even though globally we're making a lot of progress in kind of the enhancement of LGBTQ plus rights, we still see that in a survey carried out in Ireland, 75% of LGBTQ plus people have experienced being verbally hurt due to their identity. And of course, that can translate into the workforce. So really today, we're going to look at how we can help kind of mitigate against any of those harms. So in recent surveys, we can see that there are kind of disparate levels of, so like different levels of people feeling either accepted or non-accepted in the workplace. And we know that the environment that we create within any organization can kind of foster inclusivity, where people feel that they can be openly who they are, or potentially it can have the opposite effect. So in a recent survey in Ireland, 66% of employees felt that they could be out, they could be honest about who they are to all of their colleagues, okay, which is fantastic. Now, we want to see that number increase so that 100% of employees feel they can be open about who they are. However, we see that 17.4% of these employees had experienced bullying in the workplace that they felt was directly related to their identity. And when we look at the experience of transgender individuals, we see that 55% of them had experienced a workplace conflict, which is much higher than those of the employees who are non-LGBTQ plus. We also know that in general, due to a variety of reasons, LGBTQ plus employees tend to have lower levels of job satisfaction. And if they engage in processes, kind of complaints processes about their workplace conflicts, they tend to have lower levels of those issues ever being fully resolved. So how can we kind of foster an LGBTQ plus inclusive workplace? Well, there are so many ways, but we're going to look at kind of 4 different areas. The first one is through policy development. The second is through inclusive language practices. The third through belonging and representation. And the last through education, training and support. And again, we will have questions at the end of my section. So if you have any questions, please write them down now and you can give them to me at the end. And I'm aware that English is not everyone's first language here. So if I'm using terms or phrases that you're unfamiliar with, please put it into the chat so I can correct it immediately. Okay, so policy development. Every organization relies on policies. You're probably sick of hearing about them, but they are really so important to shape the way an institution creates an environment of care and inclusion for their employees. So I guess if you're thinking about policy development and you want to foster a workplace that is really inclusive of everyone, of all of our queer staff, one good tip for you would be to involve LGBTQ plus staff in consultation on policy development. And what I mean by consultation here, if that's not a term you're familiar with, is engaging them when we are working on writing policies, okay? Acknowledge that their lived experience is of real value, so they will understand how they navigate the world in a way that maybe you don't, okay? And this leads us into our second point. If we are writing policies which will affect LGBTQ plus staff members, sometimes our own human resource departments don't have significant knowledge of LGBTQ plus needs, and that's okay. You know, we all have different areas of expertise. We need to acknowledge that LGBTQ plus employees will have slightly different needs when it comes to the workplace. So if you are writing policies, perhaps about gender or about parental leave, engage external experts, okay? That is the best way to ensure that we are writing best practice policies for our sector. In Ireland, an example of who that could be would be TENI, who are the Transgender Equality Network of Ireland. They have specific staff members who are employed full-time to help organisations create policies which are really inclusive of transgender and queer staff members. The next thing you could do is think about writing a policy on gender identity and expression in the workplace, okay? Now, most organizations will already have an equality, diversity and inclusion policy, which is a statement of non-discrimination against all employees for a variety of protected characteristics. However, having a very specific policy on gender identity and expression in the workplace, one, it can outline what supports or entitlements are available for staff who may be undergoing gender-affirming healthcare. So that could include kind of medical or psychological supports for somebody who may be transitioning. On to the next one. And the next one would be to have a really robust policy on workplace behaviour. Okay, what is acceptable and what is not? And again, this is common across most organisations. However, it is really important when we know that LGBTQ plus employees do tend to experience higher rates of harassment or harmful workplace behaviour. We need to have policies that are really, really clear on what we expect of our employees. So that could be a dignity and respect policy, a policy against bullying and harassment, and a policy against sexual misconduct, because again, we know that LGBTQ plus employees from kind of various reports experience sexual misconduct at a higher rate as well. You also want to look at our family leave, parental leave and pensions policies up to date. Many of these have been drafted kind of before we had the Gender Recognition Act in 2015 in Ireland, and you know, years before that. So the language in those policies don't always reflect kind of current legislation. So you want to double check, okay, do our pensions policies include spouses that aren't necessarily a husband or a wife? Are they inclusive of same-sex marriages? Because we know, again, that LGBTQ plus employees lose out on a lot of money when it comes to receiving their pension, because policies in the first place were written in a time that wasn't inclusive of non-heterosexual marriages. And also in the area of policy development, we know that many transgender employees go through legal or social name changes, okay? And that can be different depending on the organization or the country that you're from. But most organizations would have clear steps to outline how an employee can legally change their name in the system in work, how their records, pay slips, everything can be changed up to date, and it should be done in a very clear way. We know that many people will change their name when they get married or divorced, and it should be as simple for transgender employees as well. And again, in the workplace, a lot of people might use a social name, okay, which is they have not changed their legal name, they have not gone through kind of a deed poll or something similar, but they want to experiment with a new name that gives them you know, happiness and comfort. So there should be processes in place where even if we cannot legally change their name on their pay slips or on our records, that we have processes in place where we can communicate to managers and colleagues. Emma, previously Emma, has now changed their name to Edward. Edward would like this to be communicated to all staff members. And again, in that way, we are just supporting this colleague, you know, in their kind of gender journey. And then moving on from that, one thing that we can do is just always try educate ourselves on inclusive language, okay? Language has real power, and we know, like, through so many different kind of historical movements, that the language that we used maybe 50, 20, 10 years ago may no longer be kind of acceptable. So we have to be open to the fact that language is always changing. So when we look at our policies, so as managers, you want to look at our policies. Are we using inclusive language? In our pensions policies, could we perhaps change the language so that it is non-gendered? Can we use the term spouse instead of husband or wife? In parental and maternity leave policies, could we use pregnant person instead of woman or mother? And again, this is not eradicating the experiences of women or mothers. However, it is acknowledging that perhaps somebody who has recently transitioned or who is a transgender person may also fall pregnant and may need to utilize maternity leave policy. And again, things as instead of using he or she in policies, to just use a non-gendered term, they, which is inclusive of everyone. We also, when we're through our hiring processes or when we're, you know, writing letters to our employees, have the option of an inclusive prefix. Okay, we're so used to using Mr., Mrs., Ms., and now we have a new prefix, which is inclusive of everyone, which is called MX, and that is pronounced as mix. Very, very simple. And again, for somebody who is non-binary, such as myself, or gender non-conforming, the prefix MX is a gender-neutral term that, again, if I am applying for a job somewhere and I get my first letter from them and it uses this gender-neutral MX, I know that, okay, this is an organization who are aware and acknowledge the experiences of, you know, a really wide cohort of staff, which is excellent. And then the last thing in terms of language, which again is only a recommendation, it is absolutely not necessary for everyone. However, displaying your pronouns kind of where possible can be a really welcoming thing for queer employees. So that is just to say, whether you are cisgender, which means that your gender aligns with the sex you were given at birth. So if you were born female with female anatomy and you still identify as a woman, you probably use she, her, and hers pronouns. So when someone is talking about you, they'll say, yes, she's over there, she did that. What can be really helpful is that on your email signature, you include your name and your pronouns afterwards. And that just identifies that, one, you acknowledge the fact that people's pronouns may differ from the sex that they were given at birth. And it shows that, okay, I'm open to sharing what mine are, which means I'm open to learning what yours are. And again, you are just creating a space for somebody, again, such as myself, whose pronouns differ from the sex I was given at birth. It is a symbol to me that, okay, they're open to learning about me, and now I can share mine with them. So you can do that on email signatures. If Microsoft Teams is your platform that you use, it can easily be done there as well. There's just these very small things that can be done. And then belonging, oh, sorry, one sec. Yeah, belonging representation. Really simple things that can be done in your workplace to symbol that you are an inclusive and welcoming organization. So you could have an LGBTQ plus support staff network. And really, as a manager, all you can do, you can offer some funding maybe for a group of LGBTQ staff to come together, to have a social group, to have a community of people that they can share their experiences with. You could authentically celebrate LGBTQ plus events such as Pride or Transgender Awareness Week. And also think about our representation on management boards or hiring committees. Okay, we have gender quotas, I guess in most European countries now. In Ireland, we have a gender quota of usually 40% with 20% extra there to be filled by whoever. But we do that so that we have a fair representation of gender, so that, you know, historically women have been underrepresented in kind of senior roles. But we need to think, are these gender quotas inclusive of gender minority employees? So again, people who identify maybe as non-binary or any other kind of non-binary identity. Are they included in these gender quotas? And then the last thing, facilities usage, okay? It's very hard to feel like you belong in an organization if you use the bathroom and somebody asks you to leave because you don't look like what they expect a woman or a man to look like. So having signs on your bathroom to say that this is an inclusive bathroom, to have a specific bathroom that is non-gendered, in the same way that we have bathrooms that are, accessible to people of differing abilities. It should be the same for LGBTQ plus employees. And the last one, because I'm aware of time, education and training supports, okay? As I said, the population of LGBTQ plus people are growing immensely, okay? And so is our language, and so is our knowledge that we have about them. So offer this to your staff and your employees and your managers. Don't assume that everyone has an up-to-date understanding. Offer education to them. And in doing so, you won't be relying on LGBTQ plus staff themselves to educate you, okay? We've seen this historically with global majority or Black employees, that we expect them to let us know, can I use this word? Can I use this language? How do you feel about this? You know, that can be very burdensome. That can be heavy for people who are from minority backgrounds. So pay somebody to come in and to educate your staff. And that you can do this on LGBTQ plus identities. You can do this specifically for transgender awareness training. And then the last thing is being open to being corrected, okay? Transitioning, so it's somebody transitions maybe from male to female, that is a transitionary process for everyone involved, okay? If your employee is the first transgender person you've ever met, you probably are not going to know from the get-go what I should say, how I should act, what would I do that may be offensive, okay? So if you have an employee who corrects you and says, actually, Emma, that term doesn't really align with who I am, I'd prefer if you used X word when you're talking about me. Okay, brilliant, thank you. I didn't know that before. I apologize if I caused offense. I'm going to learn from it. And then you move on. Like it is an ongoing education. So just be open to that. And then, yeah, lastly, offer supports to your employees. We know that LGBTQ plus people in general, worldwide, experience higher rates of mental ill health than kind of their non-LGBTQ plus counterparts. So if you have an employee assistance program, make sure it is everyone knows about it. Okay, have posters, have stickers, ensure that it's communicated. Coming out as LGBTQ plus can also be kind of a difficult or complex time for family. So ask yourself, are our employee assistance programs available to family members? And if they're not, maybe you could find one that is. Okay? We know that Europe in general is experiencing a cost of living crisis. Therapeutic support is very expensive. And if we can lighten that load through our employee assistance program, that would be great. And then the last thing, signposting. Okay, we should just every HR department should have a list of relevant support services that they can signpost. So send their LGBTQ plus employees to if they need additional support. Here are my sources for the data that I've used, and I'd be happy to take any questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emma. That was a really insightful presentation. And it gave such good, I think, practical applications to how we can actually implement inclusive policies. And I really like what you said about the inclusive language and how we can make those like small changes, just putting our pronouns at the end of emails, just to acknowledge, that there are many different identities and to respect our colleagues. So I see a few hands going up there. Josephine, would you like to ask a question? I'm not sure, would we be able to unmute Josephine? Oh,
thank you very much. That was really very, very interesting. My question is, it's not really a question, maybe it's a statement. Do you think that employers are investing enough money and resources in highlighting this new awareness, shall we call it? And what should there be a special budget for that?
A great question, Josephine. And I mean, if I can be really honest, I have worked in IADT for 3.5 years. And we are lucky that I am lucky that it is a higher education, institution. So we have a specific budget for equality, diversity, and inclusion, and staff development and training. And therefore, we have the support, to educate our staff members, our colleagues, and our students. So I think if you're working within maybe a government kind of funded body, there is, at every level, the kind of Department of Education, Social Justice, they are kind of funneling money into these supports. However, in private organizations, probably not. And I think that's where there's a real disparity, and we need to acknowledge as well that like diversity is value. Okay, well, like we know like statistically that having like a more diverse workforce actually kind of majorly enhances like the revenue and the reputational standing of that business or organization. So I think that it would only kind of repay in dividends if organizations were to have a specific budget for this. Like, who doesn't want to be known as the best employer for queer staff, the best employer for an inclusive workplace? So yeah, thanks, Josephine.
I thought I saw another hand up there.
I think I was just applauding Emma's presentation rather than a hand up. I thought it was an excellent presentation, Emma, and as I put in the chat group, really great practical input and recommendations on actions that companies can take. Some obviously require some thought and work and effort, but some are just very small practical things that can be done very, very quickly. And I agree with your last point, which when I chat in a moment, I'll share as well too. It's critical to link it to business impact. That's the critical point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, like, you know, we talk about, you know, like convincing managers that there is need and value, and the best way to convince anyone in any type of organization is with money, you know, to say, like, we will have a return on investment if we do this, like we will see kind of the fiscal benefits. So I would always say, if you can, if you want to get in kind of training, you know, if you really think that there's that need, make a business case, make a business plan, and, you know, and bring it and say, this is what we need, this is why we need it, and this is what we'll get in return. Because you just, you know, you can't fight against profits. Like, they're they're an important factor. Anyway, thank you so much. Appreciate that. I will, I presume we'll go on to, if there's no more questions, to Angus now.
Thank you so much, Emma. So
No
I'll hand it
problem.
over
I'll
to
stop
Angus
sharing.
now.
Great. Thanks very much indeed, Tamara and Emma. And look, for everybody on the webinar, Emma's walked through, I guess, one lens, if I can say that, Emma, of diversity, which is LGBT. And obviously there's multiple lenses, and I think it has to be thought about from a perspective of those lenses. But I actually want to come up a level to begin with. So the theme is implementing comprehensive D&I strategies in the workplace. I think the first important thing is why. Why should companies focus on diversity and inclusion? Why is it important to do that? So from my perspective and my experiences in business and in organizations, it's absolutely critical to focus on diversity, because it is, as Emma talked about, a significant business differentiation. So therefore, just like you invest in capital, you invest in new products, you invest in services, you invest in the company, it is an investment in the company by focusing on diversity. And what we mean by diversity is we're looking for the broadest representation in a team, in an organization. If you look at it from, you know, experience, coming from different industries, gender gives you a broader set of competencies. We've talked about LGBT communities. We've talked about culture. So if you're an organization that is selling into the European market, then your team and organization and leadership team should be representative of those countries, of those marketplaces, is also critical. I think a key reason why is it drives better decisions. So if you have a group of diverse people around the table coming from all of those different elements I spoke about, and I'll talk in a moment about inclusivity, but if you're then getting input with different perspectives, different backgrounds, different experiences, you will make better decisions. Secondly, you will increase the level of innovation in your company and in your organization, and you will drive a better set of results. Emma mentioned this. Better results being financial performance, market share, less turnover of staff, attracting staff more easily into your organization. And there is lots of information out there and reports from McKinsey, from lots of consultancy companies that has shown that improved and above average performance is achieved by more diverse organizations with diverse leadership teams as well. And then finally, you need to reflect your marketplace. So, you know, if you are buying from an organization or working with a company, you want to see that company representing you, whether that is your country or whether that is your skill set or your background. You want to see that representation in front of you is also extremely important. So the key driver from a business perspective to ensure this is a priority within any company or organization is that it is a business imperative. It is a key benefit to the organization. The second aspect, though, is you have to develop an inclusive culture in your organization. Why do you need that? Because if you assemble a diverse team or an organization with diverse ideas, inputs, but you don't have a culture of inclusivity, in other words, listening to, of collaboration across the organization, you're not going to draw out and get that input from the team and organization to make ultimately those better decisions. So that inclusivity is really, really critical. And what I mean by inclusivity, it's a style of leadership and a style of approach in the organization, which is that there is listening, that there is a philosophy of creating collaboration among team members and garnering and gathering that input. The leadership style is really about unlocking ideas, unlocking the input and opinions inside the organization. So when we say implementing a comprehensive diversity and inclusion strategy in the workplace, you need to both look at diversity across those lenses, anchor it from a business perspective that this is extremely important and of huge value to the company. It's the same as investing in other aspects of the business. And the second aspect is there's no point in having that diversity without that inclusivity from a culture perspective. Absolutely critical. If I talk for a moment, then, taking those two key elements of why diversity and inclusion is critical and both elements are needed, let me talk about my experiences of what I think are key areas that organizations need to do to achieve that diversity and inclusion. Emma spoke about, creating an organization that is more open to and has allies of LGBT. And that's, as I said, one lens. That has to be led from the top of the organization. You see some organizations and companies, and like Emma talked about, there's some legislation requirements now, and they identify somebody maybe in the HR organization, and they park and say, that person is who looks after diversity and inclusion in our organization. That does not work. It has to be the leader of the organization. They must recognize, as I spoke about, the importance of it, the value to the business, and the need to adjust the culture to unlock the potential. So it has to be led from the CEO of the leadership team, from the chairman or chairperson of the board of an organization. It must be led from the top of that organization. And the second aspect is that it must be authentic. You see a lot of companies describe themselves as, we are a highly diverse organization and we have an inclusive culture, and it's a banner across the top. But as all of us know, in this day and age, that doesn't work, because all it requires is one or two people to say, well, actually, when I look at the leadership team, I see, lots of men. I don't see that diversity. I don't see it there. Or that culture isn't what is described in a banner. So it has to be authentic. The leader and the organization must be representative of how they're describing themselves. And this is an absolutely critical point, because as we've talked about, there's significant business benefits. And one of the most significant challenges for a lot of companies in Ireland, in Europe, across the world at the moment, is attracting talent and bringing in skills and experience to the organization. If companies can differentiate themselves, develop a diverse, a focus on diversity and an inclusive culture, and then it is authentic, then it will cast a net out into the population. Emma described earlier on, I think, Emma, I saw in your statistics somewhere between 70,000 and 400,000 people potentially in Ireland with a population of 5 million. That's a very significant percentage, 10, 15, 20%. If you are excluding that many people, then your ability to attract talent is narrowed. That is an absolutely critical point at this stage in business, the ability to attract talent. And secondly, the ability to retain that talent. But that will only work if it's led from the top of the organization and it's a very authentic and real within the company. It is truly an inclusive culture and area. The second piece, and I won't go as much detail because I thought Emma did a super job, you have to enable it within the organization. Emma spoke about, from an LGBT point of view, lots of great examples and practicalities. You can apply that to other areas. If you want to attract people from different cultures into your organization, We have 20% of the population now in Ireland that was not born in Ireland. So 1/5 of the population comes from a different background, a different country, a different cultural background. So you can imagine real practical steps that you can take inside your organization to enable the recognition of their culture. We talked in Emma's presentation about, we call them employee resource groups or network groups. We had one within Dell called Pride and for LGBT. We also had one for our focus around gender and expanding and getting better balance in our organization around male and female members. We also had one called Gen Next, because we wanted to attract into the organization more younger people. We wanted to have that profile of background and experience. We also had ones around culture and lots of practical actions that you can take, that people who would put themselves in each of those categories or recognize themselves in those ways would be attracted to the company and embrace that culture within the organization that retains them within the company as well too. So really, really critical from an enablement point of view in the organization is the network groups and the ERGs as well too, and organizing events and activities around those areas. We had others around sustainability, because there can be multiple areas of people's interests that allows them to get involved in areas beyond the day-to-day job and feel part of the community within the organization, within the team as well too. Lots of work also can be done around mentoring, around networking, around sponsorship and around development. Because what's critical is, if you want to attract a more diverse individuals into the organization, you have to be very deliberate in relation to how you do that. If I take an example of an organization which has maybe on its leadership team, maybe 60, 70, 80% men, and they want to bring more women into the organization, then they need to work on creating more diverse slates of organization, more diversity within the candidates that they're attracting. So you have to work around your hiring people, how you're doing that, the wording you're using, but also from a development perspective within the organization as well too, and the development programs you put in place. And this is critical. To Emma's point around LGBT, I remember chatting to somebody who had joined our organization from university, from college. And I asked them, what attracted you to Dell? There's so many companies out there in the technology industry, maybe with a brand that's more known than Dell might be. And they said, look, I asked a very simple question. I asked if you had an LGBT network group or ERG. And the answer was, yes, we have. It's called Pride. And I also want to emphasize this again. The LGBT network group isn't just for people who say you recognize as LGBT. It's for everybody in the organization who are allies and want to create an environment and a culture within the organization. And they had been a member of the LGBT organization in the university and knew that if we had a company had established it, that they were taking authentic, real, practical actions to welcome and allow people to bring the whole of themselves, all of their experience, all of their insight, and make that something that the company valued and could get value from. The other two elements I would share around organizations and how you create strategies in the workplace to really make this real and impactful is that you have to hold the leadership of the organization accountable for it. And by doing that, what you do is you set targets and measurements. Emma spoke about, some of the potential representation that you might have in the organization. There's some many targets you can set that allows you to ensure that you have that diversity. For example, in US-based companies, they might look at representation from ethnic groups within the US, Spanish, Black, obviously LGBT we talked about. Gender is obviously one that is a significant focus, and there's clear legislation in that area as well too in relation to representation that is required. So companies can set targets in relation to that and then build plans on how they go from maybe 20% representation to 30 or 40% representation of a particular category, if that percentage makes sense to be representative of the marketplace in which you're working. So building setting those targets and building those plans, and then having a mechanism within the leadership of the organization to review those plans and to review performance against those targets. And many companies I've spoken to in Ireland and across Europe, they'll set out targets over the next 3, 4, or 5 years, and then report, in some cases with things like gender pay gap, they have to report publicly in relation to how they're doing against those targets. But many companies are voluntarily reporting because they want to put the message out into the marketplace that their organization, their company is welcoming of a much broader set of people. And in that way, they get and attract a greater set of talent, skills, and experience into the organization. And all of the business benefits I spoke about at the beginning can then be realized. The final point I would leave you with is that there is no silver bullet to this. You saw Emma's presentation had multiple examples of practical things. Some take time to implement and to achieve, and some are very small practical things you can do. And for me, I describe it as it's a journey, and it's over many years of progress. Because to change the culture in an organization, to change the representation in the organization, that takes time. But what is absolutely critical from a business point of view, and I've seen it across many industries and companies, the companies that embrace it and move fast in relation to taking action, building the plans, setting the targets, have a competitive advantage over the competitors in their industry and business. And so it becomes a competitive element, a differentiation for those companies. And it's about starting, building the plan, setting the targets, measuring against it, reporting, and then continuing on that journey over weeks, months, and multiple years. And you know, I see great progress here in Ireland. We have been driving an initiative around better gender representation on boards and leadership team with our Balance for Better Business initiative, which we started 6 years ago. And at that time in Ireland, 16% of board members of publicly listed companies were female. And now today, you know, 6 years later, it's 40%, where Ireland has gone from being a significant lagger in the European league table of countries to actually being in the top 10 for board representation from a gender point of view, and the top 3 for gender representation in leadership teams. So it can be done, but in this case, obviously, I'm describing progress steadily over a 5-6 year period. And that's the type of period of focus and initiative that companies need to put behind that. So let me pause there. Hopefully between Emma's presentation with the examples and input that she's given there around LGBT, I've taken a more broader view of business importance of this initiative and developing a diversity strategy as well as an inclusive culture is anchored in better business performance. And any company that wants to drive that, these are the type of things that companies will step up and leaders and say, that's a business imperative, and I'll focus and prioritize around that. So Tamara, let me hand back to you from my section.
Thank you very much, Angus. That's a brilliant presentation. And it's great to hear that both the presentations are really echoing what's in the MOOC this week. So thank you. I'll hand it over to the audience if anybody has a question. Maria? She's just...
They're a quiet audience. We must have really addressed every potential question in the presentations.
I think Emma has her hand up.
Yeah, I mean, this is really just I guess a comment, kind of more so than a question, but I was really delighted to hear you talk about that allyship piece, which I didn't really kind of mention, you know, that the same in IDT, myself and a colleague kind of co-founded in 2021, I think, IDT's first queer staff network. And like that, we had support from, you know, from the president of the, you know, the institute. But also we're open to, you know, at our last kind of staff social gathering, we had actually more ally staff members than LGBTQ plus staff members that came, you know, and we had one colleague who brought her son and his partner, you know, and they're queer. And again, for her children, it was like, okay, you know, my parent works with other queer people. She, you know, she's open to understanding from her peers and colleagues, and in turn she's learned more about us, you know. So there's so much more, I think, value even to your own personal and familial lives that you can gather from being open to allyship and engagement. So yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that that's just really important, you know.
No, it's very, very important. And you've given a very good example within LGBT of that. It's the same from my perspective. We had a network group in ERG focused around improving the gender diversity in the organization. And, you know, sometimes I would see companies and it would be maybe 2 women that would lead that. We said, no, each time we want a man and we want a woman to lead it. Because the point is that the entire organization sees the value and the benefit from that. As well as the fact, to be honest, you know, any organization is far more interesting and it's far more fun when you have that diversity of representation, as well as the business benefits I've spoken about. But that's important, is that it's not seen as, you know, a group of people, you know, who represent themselves as LGBT or female or young or from one particular culture, and that it's their responsibility to kind of change things. It's not. It's saying it's inclusive of all the organization to drive that change. I think that's really, really important. And you know, same for me this morning, listening to your presentation, Emma, you know, organizations having the opportunity to have those presentations, to hear, I learned things I did not know. And despite the fact my son is gay, there was a couple of things in there I didn't realize, and that was very helpful, you know, and I think that's always important, to educate and to share. And that's what those ERG groups, whether it's in the universities or whether it's in the companies, can do to share and give insight to the rest of the organization as well. I think I see Audrey's hand is up, Tamara. You're on mute there, Audrey. Somebody might have to give Audrey
there we go. There we go. We're in now. I just have one question, and it's actually a comment that I have heard quite a lot over the last couple of years since starting on this particular project, where and this is out to both Emma and Angus, and sometimes people will say to me, it's not necessarily about diversity or inclusion, it's about hiring the best person for the job. And I'm wondering what your response is on that, because each time I have a different answer. And I'm just wondering, from a practice point of view, what you both think of that.
It's a great point. I had it written down here in my notes, but I missed it when I was covering it. I meant to say this, and I always use it in every presentation or discussion. This is not about compromise. This is not about tokenism. This is not about, you know, I've got to hit a target, therefore I will hire more women and I'll give the job to any woman who comes along, or an LGBT person, because I want to get that representation, or whatever it might be. That is a massive mistake. And some companies do that, or some leaders do that. You're not looking for that. You're not looking to compromise on talent. You're looking to hire the best person every time, internally or from externally, in every single role. What you're trying to create is that in front of you is a slate of candidates, a group of candidates that is more representative of the market. I often said to people, look, if you're hiring a director for your board and 5 men come in for interview, I can guarantee you one thing that's going to happen: you're going to hire a man. Whereas if you have a diverse slate of candidates where maybe there's 2 or 3 women and there's 2 or 3 men, you then get to interview and to get the opportunity, obviously, to pick the best candidate from that, whether that is a man or a woman. And so for me, there's zero compromise. You have to pick the best person. but you need to create the opportunities inside your organization and hiring outside a broader set of diversity so that you have options and choice and you get that in front of you. And the biggest challenge often for companies is they say, well, I can't find talent in that area. It's there. You just have to work on it and attract it into the interview process or the development process. Emma, I'm sure you have a few thoughts on Audrey's question.
Yeah, I mean, again, I agree with everything that you said. You know, it's not about compromise, you know, and it's about like maybe targeted recruitment. Okay, we don't have enough global majority workers. And sorry, when I say global majority, in Ireland we tend to use the term ethnic minority, because in Ireland people of color are a minority here. When we look at a global scale, actually Caucasian people are the minority. Okay, so again, I just go back to inclusive language and kind of reframing how we think about things. We're very insular, you know, in the language that we use. We put ourselves first. But anyway, so global majority people, like, are we just, if we're finding it hard to hire these people, we're saying, okay, we're just not getting enough applicants. It's like looking, where are we advertising? You know, are we putting every advertisement on the back of the Sunday Times, you know, or the Irish Times? Like, are we really just casting the net wide enough, you know? So I think that that's really important. And also when we look at our hiring practices, to be, you know, to be aware and to ensure that our HR and our hiring committees are maybe undertaking unconscious bias training. Like, it's not our fault. We have all been socialized, you know, through kind of the various cultures and environments that we grew up in, you know, that we have certain expectations for what a good worker and what a good employee is. And a lot of the time that comes down to what we see in ourselves and our colleagues as, you know, good characteristics. And we tend to then group them together, okay? You know, if all of my colleagues are white and have a master's degree, I'm probably going to look for someone who fits in with that, you know? However, just because historically that's what's worked, it doesn't mean that having, you know, somebody, I don't know, maybe with less formal education or somebody from a different cultural background, that they actually couldn't add immense value. So again, doing simple things like making unconscious bias training mandatory for our hiring committees. You know, that's such an easier way to acknowledge that bias could in fact be impacting these hiring processes. So yeah.
I would just add one other quick point then as well too. I think it's about setting the stage as well. That, you know, I remember we used to go to universities hiring, and the talent acquisition team were of an older profile, would go doing the hiring. And then we changed it and said, no, the people who joined us last year from university, they're actually going to go back and do the hiring. So that when people met them, they said, oh, you're kind of saying, when did you join? I joined last year. I was in you. Oh, what's it like? You know, and they can relate. So across the table or on the stage, they can see themselves. And if you can see yourself there, you can see yourself in the company or on the team. And that's really important, that people can see themselves there, whether it's, you know, young people, whether it's people of certain cultures, whether it's LGBT, etc. It needs to be visible and open to them as well. So there's lots of, as you said, lots of small little techniques you can apply, Audrey, to bring that talent in, but you always have to pick the best person. Never compromise on that.
Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Angus. Thank you, Emma. The presentations were amazing. The discussion, so thought-provoking. And yeah, thanks everybody for joining. So I'd like to wrap it up there. Thanks again for coming. We won't have a webinar next week, but we will the following week. And thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tamara. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.